To understand the reality of Pelican Bay's solitary world, you must imagine living inside a concrete box where movement is measured in inches and silence becomes a companion you didn't choose. The SHU cell is small, around 8 by 10 feet, a space so tight that pacing means taking only a few slow steps before turning back. The walls are plain, pale, unforgiving. There is no window to glance out of, no sunlight to warm the air, no view to remind you that the world continues beyond the concrete. The air remains cold throughout the year, carrying a faint mineral scent from the walls. The overhead light, always buzzing, blurs the line between morning and night. Days lose shape. Nights lose meaning. For many, the cell becomes less of a room and more of a suspended world where the only sounds are the distant echoes of metal doors and the slow hum of ventilation. The routine is unchanging. Meals arrive through a small slot in the door, the only opening connecting inmates to the outside. That slot becomes the center of life, where food comes in, where mail arrives, where voices pass through like faint whispers on the other side of a storm. There is no physical contact. No shared space. No moment where two people stand in the same room. Recreation is not freedom. It is a small concrete yard, a rectangle with walls stretching so high that only a sliver of sky is visible. The space is barren, colorless, designed not for exercise, but containment. Some describe it as stepping from one box into another, a different shape but the same confinement. And so each day becomes predictable. Not because it's peaceful, but because nothing changes. Every sound becomes significant. Every second becomes heavier. Living in the SHU is not simply about isolation, it is about being removed from every element that gives the human mind its rhythm, its stimulation, its sense of belonging. In Pelican Bay's solitary world, the box is not just a cell. It is a universe reduced to concrete. There is a reason humans are social beings. Conversation, eye contact, movement, touch, these aren't luxuries, they are foundations that keep the mind anchored. When these foundations are removed, the mind begins to drift in ways even the strongest people cannot fully control. In solitary confinement, days stretch into long corridors of silence. The first thing to fade is the sense of time. Without sunlight, without routine, without activity, the brain struggles to place itself in the flow of day and night. Hours feel identical. The mind tries to keep track, but eventually, even internal clocks begin to malfunction. Next comes the slow unraveling of perception. In isolation, the smallest sounds become magnified, a guard's footsteps echoing down a hallway, the clank of a metal gate far away, even the scrape of a food tray becomes a dramatic event. Silence becomes a sound of its own, pressing into the mind with an invisible weight. Over time, thought patterns begin to change. People start talking to themselves just to hear a voice. Others repeat the same sentence or count the same cracks in the wall to maintain focus. Some imagine conversations with people who are not there, a coping mechanism that blurs the line between memory and imagination. Sleep becomes unpredictable, too light, too heavy, or entirely absent. Some spend nights staring at the ceiling, waiting for morning to come, only to realize that morning looks exactly like night. Dreams become distorted reflections of the outside world that they barely remember. The emotional toll intensifies. Anxiety, restlessness, frustration, and a growing sense of unreality begin to take hold. The brain, without stimulation or interaction, creates its own pathways, some of which lead to fear, paranoia, or deep loneliness. The human mind, when deprived of connection, begins to fray at the edges. This is the cost of isolation. A slow, almost invisible erosion. Not of the body, but of the self. And in Pelican Bay's solitary world, this cost was carried by thousands. Pelican Bay's SHU was built with a single purpose: to isolate individuals who were considered the highest security risks. But over time, what qualified someone for the SHU became one of the most debated topics in California's prison system. Not everyone sent to solitary had committed violent acts inside the prison. Some were placed there due to suspicion, affiliations, or behaviors that were interpreted as signs of risk. Sometimes it was based on artwork, reading materials, or reports from other inmates. A set of criteria that could sweep individuals into a world of isolation without clear evidence, and without a clear path out. Once inside, the SHU became more than a punishment. It became a holding space that could last indefinitely. Months or years could pass without a clear explanation about when the confinement would end. And with each passing year, the psychological effects deepened. Critics argued that the system was punitive beyond purpose, creating conditions that resembled psychological hardship rather than correctional management. The debate grew louder as more information reached the public. Advocates, researchers, families, and former inmates began raising questions: how long is too long in isolation? Who decides? And what happens to someone who has lived years without meaningful human contact? The controversy didn't fade. It grew, casting a national spotlight on Pelican Bay and forcing the country to rethink the place of solitary confinement in modern corrections. For years, the stories from inside Pelican Bay's solitary world remained hidden behind thick walls and heavy steel doors. But pressure builds when silence lasts too long. Eventually, the voices of the men in isolation found a way out, through action, through persistence, and through a quiet resistance that echoed across the state. The hunger strikes that emerged from California's prisons were not outbursts of anger. They were desperate signals from people who felt forgotten. Men who had lived decades in confinement used the only tool they had left: their own absence from the daily routine. By refusing to eat, they spoke louder than they ever could from behind their cell doors. The movement spread rapidly, reaching prisons across the state. The message was simple: no one can live buried in silence forever. Their stories began reaching families, advocates, journalists, and officials. And as more voices emerged, the world outside began to grasp the magnitude of what solitary confinement truly meant. These were not voices seeking chaos. They sought recognition, fairness, connection, and basic humanity. And for the first time in a long time, people listened. Their message shook the foundation of the system and marked a turning point in the history of Pelican Bay. Change within a system as large as California's prison network does not come quickly. Yet the momentum that grew from public pressure and legal action began to carve a new path. The reality of Pelican Bay's SHU could no longer be overlooked. Policies were re-examined, and reforms slowly took shape. One of the most significant changes was ending the practice of indefinite solitary confinement based solely on gang affiliation. This opened a new door for many who had spent years, even decades, in isolation without a clear path forward. Programs were developed to transition inmates from the SHU to less restrictive environments, offering opportunities for gradual reintegration into general population. The transformation didn't erase the conditions of the past, but it marked the beginning of a system attempting to correct itself. The SHU no longer held the same power it once did. The conversation shifted toward mental health, rehabilitation, and the long-term impact of isolation. It was not perfect. It was not complete. But it was progress built on years of silence finally broken. When the door of the SHU finally opens, it may feel like freedom. But for many who have lived years in isolation, the moment they step out is only the beginning of a new and unfamiliar battle. Solitary confinement does not stay behind those walls. It follows quietly, hidden in the mind, shaping thoughts, reactions, fears, and perceptions long after the cell is left behind. The first shock comes from sound. Inside the SHU, the world is muted, a place where voices flatten, footsteps echo softly, and silence fills every corner. Stepping into a busy room, hearing multiple conversations, or even listening to the natural noise of daily life becomes overwhelming. Ordinary sounds feel too loud, too close, too chaotic. Some people flinch at sudden noises. Some freeze. Some instinctively seek corners or walls, places where nothing can approach from behind. Then comes the challenge of personal space. In the SHU, every movement is confined. The body adapts to solitude. When people leave isolation, the closeness of others, even a harmless passerby, can trigger discomfort or panic. Crowds feel threatening. Simple activities like standing in line at a store, sitting in a waiting room, or riding public transportation can create a rush of anxiety. The world feels unpredictable, unmanageable, too full of stimuli. Social interaction becomes a complex puzzle. In solitary, conversations are rare, brief, and often through a metal door. Eye contact fades as a normal behavior. Communication becomes internal, thinking, imagining, rehearsing, reflecting, repeating. When someone leaves solitary, they must suddenly re-enter a world where expressions matter, where tone matters, where body language speaks loudly. Some struggle to maintain eye contact for more than a second. Others feel unsure of how to read emotions on someone's face. Some remain guarded, speaking only when necessary, out of habit formed in a place where speaking held little purpose. Memory and decision-making are also affected. In isolation, routines are minimal. Choices are limited. Days require little planning because nothing changes. When someone re-enters society, even simple decisions can feel heavy, choosing what to eat, where to go, or which route to take. Decisions that were once automatic now require energy, concentration, and emotional effort. This mental fatigue is real and often misunderstood by those who haven't lived through such deprivation. Sleep disturbances linger as well. Many spent years sleeping under fluorescent lights that never fully turn off, in rooms where silence is punctuated only by distant metallic echoes. Relearning how to sleep in darkness, or in a room where other people breathe and move, can be a struggle. Some wake frequently. Others sleep lightly, conditioned by years of hyper-awareness in isolation. Emotion becomes a territory that must be rediscovered. Solitary demands emotional numbness, a protective shell formed to survive the monotony and loneliness. After release, emotions return all at once, and not always gently. Happiness may feel foreign. Sadness may feel heavy. Anger may come unexpectedly. Some experience waves of frustration or fear without understanding why. The emotional compass becomes difficult to navigate, and it takes time to regain balance. Yet despite all these challenges, there is also resilience, a quiet resilience that grows from surviving an environment few will ever fully understand. Many individuals take their pain and shape it into purpose. Some become advocates, speaking for those still in solitary. Some share their stories with universities and lawmakers. Others assist people re-entering society after prison, using their experience to guide those who walk the same difficult path. They talk about learning to hear again, learning to trust again, learning to feel again. They talk about the strange freedom of walking under an open sky, the shock of seeing colors that once felt muted, the overwhelming beauty of simple things, a breeze, a conversation, the sight of people laughing in a park. These moments of rediscovery become small victories, reminders that even after years of isolation, the human spirit can find ways to reconnect with the world. But the shadow of solitary confinement never disappears completely. It lingers quietly, shaping thoughts, influencing reactions, appearing in moments of stress or uncertainty. Some describe it as a weight they carry. Others describe it as a room in their mind that never fully closes. For many, it is a reminder of time they can never get back, years spent in silence, in stillness, in a space where the world was reduced to concrete and steel. The long-term effects raise questions that continue to resonate through conversations about criminal justice. How long can a person be isolated before that isolation becomes damage? How should a society balance security with humanity? What responsibility do we have to those who leave such environments, carrying invisible scars that time alone cannot heal? Pelican Bay's solitary world forces us to confront these questions. Its history, its stories, and its legacy remind us that prisons do not only confine the body, they shape the mind. And the echoes of solitary confinement stretch far beyond the walls where it began, lingering in the lives of those who survived it, in the families who welcomed them back, and in the broader debate over what confinement should be in a modern society. The SHU may be a physical place, but its impact is mental, emotional, and deeply human. It leaves a mark that cannot be seen, only felt, a quiet imprint carried long after the cell door closes for the last time. And this imprint is what continues to drive the push for understanding, reform, and a future where isolation is not a sentence that reshapes a person forever, but a carefully measured tool used only when absolutely necessary. Because when someone leaves solitary confinement, they do not simply walk out of a cell. They walk out carrying a world of silence that will follow them, shaping who they are and who they will become. And it is in recognizing this truth that the conversation about Pelican Bay's SHU must continue, not just as a chapter of prison history, but as a reflection on humanity itself.